well, welcome back. Yes, indeed, that's what we'll be talking about today. But we read this view briefly about the xenophobic attacks before we then dovetail into the just concluded supplementary elections in some parts of the country. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, indeed, that's Dr. Tam-George, Executive Director, Institute of Communications and Corporate Studies in Lagos, as well as former lecturer, University of Cape Town in South Africa. Let's get quickly your thoughts on this, because many wonder, how did you survive this? Because listening to Prof's description about what goes on there, incidentally, I thought it was even today that you both spoke, but it was before now. How do you see what's going on there today?
You mentioned that I'm a bit ambivalent discussing xenophobia in South Africa because I schooled there and worked there for so many years. Throughout my years in South Africa, I was not personally discriminated against. I had scholarships at the University of the Witwatersrand where I did my PhD. I taught in that university. I had some of my best opportunities as an academic working and schooling in South Africa. When I left Johannesburg, I relocated to the University of Cape Town where I was a postdoctoral fellow, and then eventually I stayed on to teach in the university. At no time throughout the trajectory of my career in South Africa was I personally discriminated against. You see, but what I noticed in South Africa is that there is a massive historical ignorance among the people. You see, what I mean by that is that the political elite, the traditional elite, and even the religious elite are fully aware of the extent of support that the rest of the continent gave to South Africa during the struggle against apartheid. But more than 80% of South Africans don't know this. They do not teach black history in South Africa as part of the official school curriculum. So there's a massive amount of historical ignorance. So what you see is that people do not know the debt that South Africa owes the rest of the continent. And I think it is a failure of leadership, both traditional, political, and religious leadership in South Africa, not to be able to make these people understand, the rest of society understand, that without the support of countries like Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Lesotho, Swaziland, and the rest of the continent, South Africa probably would have had a tougher time getting independence in 1994. So I think that there is a big knowledge gap between those who are in political and religious authority and the rest of the people. So what I think they should do is to make sure, the former president of South Africa, Mbeki, he lived here in Lagos. He had Nigerian scholarship to study. He knows this. Mbeki knows this. The political elite in South Africa, especially those in the ranks of the ANC, they know this. But a vast majority of the people don't know. So what I think is that it is very easy for analysts here on the issue and elsewhere to always say, oh, there's so much poverty in South Africa, and because of the income gap between the wealthy and the poor, the tendency is for the poor people to then turn against foreigners. That is not what, that is not even supported by reality. It's not supported by social science. South Africa is never cited as one of the poorest countries in the world. In fact, I have done consulting for the African Union, and I stayed for a while in Ethiopia, and I saw poverty in Ethiopia that you can't compare with many places in the world. And yet they don't turn against foreigners. So there could be income disparity and the frustrations that it spawns. But then there is the major problem, I think, is that there is a major, massive historical ignorance as far as the role the continent played in the liberation of South Africa is concerned.
If they knew some part of that role that they played, perhaps the actions would be a little different.
I think they will relate with the rest of the continent with a heart of gratitude, because there is a historical debt to pay, and part of that debt cannot be paid by money. It can only be paid by good neighborliness, recognizing that wherever they find the Zimbabweans or Nigerians or Malawians or Togolese in South Africa, they will see them as brothers, because in their toughest times in history, the rest of the continent supported them. But how many South Africans know this? In fact, there's a whole generation of South Africans that have been born since 1994. They don't know this. You don't find it in their history books. You don't find it in their social science subjects. You don't find it in their citizenship education. So there's a massive historical ignorance in South Africa. I wasn't personally discriminated against, I have to emphasize, but then you can't universalize my own experience. I was sheltered in the university environment. But those people who are suffering the most are those who set up shops on the streets, who go out going about their independent businesses. Those are the ones who are specifically targeted. And my contention is that if people knew just how much the rest of the continent helped South Africa, they probably will react a lot more differently.
Okay, let's bring it further down. Looking at the supplementary elections just conducted over the weekend, you had also been part of our elections when we looked at the bigger picture at that time. But now we've had the last batch of those elections, although I think almost all of them, those who lost out this time, the All Progressive Grand Alliance, the APC, PDP in some reports saying they're also kicking in Imo State. So discontent within the rank and file of the losing parties. But largely, what's your impression of how it turned out?
I think that the elections weren't perfect. Even those who won have been, in some cases, humble enough to acknowledge the kind of difficulties that they've had in terms of PVC distribution, in terms of mobilizing INEC staff personnel to move from place to place. In fact, there were situations where INEC staff didn't even show up 6 hours into when they were supposed to accredit people. In most cases, voters turned up before INEC staff eventually turned up. So even those who have been victorious in this process have been, those who are frank have admitted that there has, we've seen serious logistical challenges. I do not know whether INEC has compiled a comprehensive report here, but it seems to me there are a host of issues they need to address, because as I have said in programs here and elsewhere, the fact that we are going to have elections every 4 years is no longer a subject of speculation. It's a constitutional guarantee. In 2019, for instance, we are going to go through the same another round of election process. So what seems logical for me is to begin now to make sure that people, the registration of voters is constantly, not episodically, but constantly updated. People who are 17 just a few months ago are already eligible to vote, by the next election. So what this means is that INEC needs to make sure these processes are constantly updated. We have the PVCs, which we never used in our electoral history. We need to dynamize, in my opinion, we need to dynamize the technology in such a manner that anybody who simply moves from one location to the other ought to be able to vote. The fact that you moved from Lekki to live in Ikeja, or you moved from Lagos to Kano shouldn't disenfranchise you in the 21st century. People should be able to vote. They always analogize by saying that the PVCs are not in fact electronically too different from the ATM cards we use, but I use my ATM cards wherever I go. So we need to dynamize the technology in such a way that people ought to be able to cast their votes wherever they go. We now have another 4 full years to do that. Okay, if they need to dynamize the technology by talking to the manufacturers and all that, they have 4 full years to do that. The other part has to do with the card readers. The card readers ought to capture the biometric details of those who vote. If the card readers have been so massively defective, we need to make sure that we also get that right. My own suggestion will be that if you approach technology, sometimes you need to approach it with some caution. What this means is that if we are using the card readers, we should use it side by side with manual accreditation process.
Are you seeing a situation where this card reader become a permanent feature of our elections because we're still retaining the PVC?
Yes, if we have the card readers, then of course we will be using the PVCs inside of them. But you see, what I suspect we are all looking for is to make sure we use methodologies that will enhance the integrity of the electoral process. So if the PVCs will enhance that, all and good. But you see, we shouldn't imagine technology as though it is somehow incompatible with getting it right. So when we use the PVCs, we should also use it in such a manner that should it fail, we ought to be able to manually accredit those. I mean, even those of us who use telephones, you know, because of the unreliability of network and the rest of them, we take extra care to say, why don't we also keep another telephone just in case this other one doesn't work. So I think that we shouldn't be victims of the tyranny of technology. We ought to be able to dynamize the process in such a manner that where the PVCs fail for whatever reason, including reasons of theft, INEC didn't address it throughout the electoral process. If people stole your PVCs, and those PVCs are supposed to be in the custody of INEC, these are sensitive materials. But if they are stolen while in the custody of INEC, people simply couldn't vote. That is unacceptable to me personally.